Hey folks, it's time for another Not Actually Trek, Actually comment response video. I've made a bunch of Star Trek related videos since the last time I did one of these, which means I've got a bunch of your comments to respond to, so no time to waste. I have a whole lot of low effort content to crank out, so let's start cranking. This first set of comments comes from my most recent Star Trek-related video, the one about how new Star Trek can learn a few things from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Here's one from Nathaniel Graynor. Another interesting example to consider. DS9's Trials and Tribulations manages to be one of the most fan-servicey instantiations, there's a word, of Trek ever, while still telling a great new story about the here and now. They literally managed to go inside an earlier episode and carve out a whole new plot and conflict that interlocks with and adds richness to the old one. It seems like the creators of the show were smart enough to realize that the premise was already fan-servicey enough, so most of the jokes, and one of the things that really helps the episode is that it is played for laughs. So that's a big help. Most of the jokes in Trials and Tribulations are not really fan-servicey jokes. I mean, there are a couple. There's the Klingon gag where they see the smooth forehead Klingons and they're like looking at Worf and looking back at them and looking at Worf, and Worf's like, we don't talk about it like that. You know, that's kind of a fan-servicey joke. That's a reference, right? And there's the stuff with Dax being attracted to Spock and being attracted to Dr. McCoy. But a lot of the other stuff, it's not like fan service jokes. Like the stuff with Bashir and O'Brien in the turbo lift with the woman who may or may not be Julian's great grandmother. Like that's not relying on a reference. That's a fresh new joke. If anything, it's making fun of a trope. It's satirizing an idea, the sort of, time travel paradox thing that is frequently employed in time travel stories, but it's not making a specific reference to a specific Star Trek episode. And it's a really funny bit. And there are bits like that sort of sprinkled throughout the episode. So it doesn't rely just on the wink, wink, remember this types of fan service jokes. It, even in that context of literally revisiting an old episode, it finds ways to do fresh new material that doesn't lean on the fan service so much, and I really, really appreciate that about it. Dietrich von Saschen says, the best way forward for Star Trek is to tell new stories. Make the characters the protagonists of their own adventures. So much this. And not just for Star Trek. The moment you said this, I immediately went and thought of the new Star Wars stuff as well. Why things like Rogue One and The Mandalorian succeed, whereas things like Solo and The Rise of Skywalker don't. Tickling the nostalgia bone is all well and good, but it's not why we consume media of any franchise. Well, it's certainly not why I consume media of any franchise. It does seem to be why a certain number of fans do. I've noticed that with both the new Star Trek shows and the new Star Wars stuff, the people, not everybody, but a lot of the people who really, really like it, who think that it's just fantastic, when they react to specific things, they're reacting to just the presence of certain characters or the fact that certain references to other stuff were made. Like, I saw people on Twitter after the first episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show came out, who were just completely in love with it. They thought it was just the greatest thing ever. And for a lot of them, when they did mention specific things, it was, oh, I can't believe Obi-Wan mentioned Padme. Like, that was all they needed. That's all they wanted. They don't care about the story. They don't care about the plot. They don't care about character motivation, anything like that. They just heard somebody reference another character from another thing that they like. And they were like, oh God, what a great show. And I'm not meaning to, well, I am making fun of them a little, but I don't want to be, mean to them about it. Because if that's what you enjoy, that's what you enjoy. Like, if that's what brings them in, then that's what they like. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what brings me in. Like, I need a little more than, oh, he referenced another thing. Like, I personally don't really get the appeal of that. I would rather have a story, an original, new, interesting story with characters I can invest in and care about what happens to them. Just hearing a guy say, oh, you remind me of this other character from this other movie. That's not, no matter how much I love the character he's referencing, that doesn't make a difference to me. I need more. That's not really storytelling to me. I think that's the only way that, especially long-running franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars, that's the only way they can continue to live and breathe. You can't just keep revisiting the old places and going, oh boy, remember this, remember that episode, or picking out little details in the older stuff and blowing them up and saying, did you ever wonder how Han Solo got his jacket? And here's 2 hours about that. That's not moving anything forward. That doesn't accomplish anything other than fan service and building out the lore, which is something that I detest for its own sake. I could not give less of a shit about building out the lore. Tell a story. That's how you build out the lore. You tell a new story. And then the story becomes a part of the lore. Building out the lore doesn't mean, the Kessel Run, Han said something that sounded a little funny 40 years ago in a movie, so let's really dig in and explain how it actually makes sense. Like that, I could not give less of a shit about that. Oh, Klingons have slightly different looks in the different shows and movies. Why did their foreheads have ridges here, but they were smooth here? I know, let's do a whole two-parter in a show and explain it. That's, the kind of building out the lore that a lot of fans really like, and I could not care less about that. I don't give a shit. You don't need to explain all the things that were mistakes or oversights or continuity errors or were contradicted by later shows or whatever. I don't give a shit. Just tell me a story. A good story with characters that I can care about. That's literally all I care about. Rusty bollocks. So, sloppy lore knowledge is a strength. Why bother to make a story set in an established universe if you want to tell a story? Just create your own IP. Oh wait, that won't guarantee instant audience. Anyway, good to see laziness and lack of attention being a good thing. I don't think it's laziness or lack of attention. I think it's prioritizing the story that you are telling. And if in telling the story you want to tell in the best way that you feel it is to be told, if doing that requires you to ignore certain things that were previously established, or retcon certain things, or change, reinterpret, whatever, then I have no problem with that. Like, a good example is Spock and T'Pring in Strange New Worlds. And Amok Time is my favorite episode of classic Star Trek. And in Amok Time, it is strongly implied that Spock and T'Pring have not seen each other since they were kids. It may even have been stated outright. I can't remember exactly if there's a line of dialogue that establishes that they haven't seen each other since they were kids, but it is at least strongly implied that they haven't seen each other since they were kids. In Strange New Worlds, they are seeing each other, it seems like, pretty regularly as adults, right? They have like a relationship. I don't mind that at all. I do not care if it contradicts something that was established or at least strongly implied in the original series. It makes no difference to me at all. Why? Because I like this show that they are making right now. And I like what they are doing with Spock and T'Pring in this show that they are making right now. Another example is, I think there was a line of dialogue in Turnabout Intruder, which was the last episode of the original series, where there is a body swap. And there's a body swap in the most recent episode, as of this recording, of Strange New Worlds, Spock Amok. And in Turnabout Intruder, I think there's a line of dialogue. Again, it may just be an implication, but Spock says that this is the first body swap they've ever experienced. That the transference of one consciousness into another body and vice versa, like, it was only theoretical. It's never actually been observed. And the fact that Spock not only was present for such an event in Strange New Worlds, which is set years before classic Trek, but was one of the participants, just flatly contradicts that. And again, I don't care. It makes no difference to me whatsoever. And if that was brought up in the writer's room, if their continuity person said, hey, just so you know, you're writing this body swap episode, there's a line in classic Trek where Spock says that this has never happened before, right? If that was brought up and the writers deliberately chose to ignore it to tell their story, then the writers made the right decision. Because again, their job is to tell their stories as best they can, not to be custodians of the lore to the detriment of their own show. And one more from the Wrath of Khan video from James Dallas. In some regards, I think fandom has to bear some responsibility for the excessive callbacks to prior series. Imagine you're a writer and you've got a bunch of nerds caterwauling about the canon, referencing back to previous shows is at the very least a way to prove you did your homework. As media critic Marty Kaplan said about The Daily Show, you can't get the jokes on Jon Stewart unless you understand what it's about. I agree with you up to a point. I do think the fandom has played a role in the rise of excessive gratuitous fan service, because you're right, there is a certain segment of the fan base that are, I would say, incredibly pedantic about stuff like that, about the lore, about the canon, about contradictions to previously established. Like, they're really, really fussy and precious about it. And they tend to be very loud and to complain very easily at the slightest provocation. But that doesn't mean that the writers or producers of the show have to pay them any attention. And I don't think they should. Like, it seems like the last Star Wars movie was. Like, Rise of Skywalker really seems like a misguided exercise in trying to please the fans instead of telling the story that should have been told in the best way that they could tell it. So, I mean, I really don't think there's any value at all in paying attention to what the fans want or what you think the fans want when you are making the thing. Like, if you make the thing and then it comes out and some of the fans who complain about it actually have a point, actually say something that is critical and constructive, and you think, oh, actually, that's a good idea, then if you do another one, you can take that into account, and you can make it better based on the constructive criticism that you got. But just trying to say, like, oh, put this in, don't do this, this will piss the fans off, do that, like that should play no part in the creative process. You should not be trying to guess what the audience is going to do and then cater to that. You should be telling the story the best way you can. So I do think the fandom plays a certain role, but I don't think the fandom is entirely to blame, because ultimately the writers and the producers make the choice to bow to the fandom and to try to pander to them. And that is what is ultimately responsible for this epidemic of gratuitous fan service. Now, these next several comments are from my video about Star Trek and horror. And this first one is from Chris H., who says, "Frame of mind, I still can't watch without getting the chills. Probably it's the prospect of having lost one's own mind and everything conceived of as real is brought into question. It really scares the shit out of me. Jonathan Frakes does an awesome performance of Riker struggling with the competing concepts of reality, and I think it is one of TNG's best ventures into the horror genre, intentionally or not. And I'm usually a person not easily terrified by classic horror movies or motives. Frame of Mind is certainly a great episode and a great horror-themed episode. I didn't mention it during my video, but I very easily could have and maybe should have. What I like about Frame of Mind is it's one of several examples I can think of a Star Trek episode that feels like it could have been a Twilight Zone episode. And I always love that. Whenever another show tells a story or tells a story in such a way that it reminds me of a Twilight Zone, and I find myself sitting there watching it going, with a few adjustments, this could have been a Twilight Zone, that wins me over instantly, because Twilight Zone is one of my very favorite shows ever. And if you can tell a Star Trek story that makes me think, oh boy, this feels like a Twilight Zone, that's going to get me every time. So Frame of Mind is great. And yes, you're right, Jonathan Frakes gives one of his best performances in the series in that episode. Just a top-notch episode all around. Sarah Scott, I would genuinely love to see Star Trek tackling all kinds of genres. I'm glad they're doing a fantastic comedy now, which I love, even though I know it's not Steve's cup of tea or Steve's cup of coffee, as I know tea isn't Steve's cup of tea either. Anyway, I'd love a genuine horror series of Star Trek Ghostbusters. I'd love a medical procedural show, Hope Ship? I'd love a courtroom drama. I'd love a political West Wing program. Make it so, Paramount, make it so. I think this is a good idea in general. It's one of the things that I have thought for the last few years as it became clear that Paramount wanted to really reinvest in Star Trek and expand the franchise and start doing more shows and stuff, that one of the ideas for doing that would be to focus on genre-specific shows set in the Star Trek universe. I would love to see a Star Trek medical show, I would love to see a Star Trek legal drama or a Star Trek cop show. I think there are all kinds of genres that could blend very well with the general premise and world of Star Trek that would make really interesting shows, or could potentially make interesting shows that would not have the danger of repeating themselves. Because that's the danger with Star Trek, is no matter how good it is, if you do a Star Trek show and it's a bunch of people on a starship exploring strange new worlds, right? I mean, Strange New Worlds has turned out great so far, but you run into that danger of, boy, this is just another Star Trek show. This feels the same. Why make this show? They've already made this show 4 times before, so you run into that threat. But if you focus on a particular genre and a particular kind of story within this established Star Trek framework, then you lessen the danger of that. And I would love to see them do that for sure. I would love to see them do that. Maybe if the current expansion of the franchise continues, eventually we will get some more specialized Star Trek shows. I think that would be really cool. Falcon Man 1121, the Star Trek episode that sticks out to me as a horror-themed episode is Night Terrors from the 4th season of TNG. You mentioned the terror of not getting a good night's sleep, but this is the true expression of that. Between the dread of watching my heroes begin losing their minds and being completely helpless to stop it, and the morgue scene where Crusher hallucinates the room full of bodies sit up, this one kept me up a few nights. That is another excellent, excellent horror-themed episode. And yeah, that scene with Dr. Crusher in the morgue, or I guess the makeshift morgue, where all the bodies sit up, that's a really spooky scene. It's really well done. One thing that always kind of it doesn't bother me that much. I would hesitate to even call it a plot hole, but it's just a contrivance in the writing that allowed the episode to happen. And those are fine, by the way. Counselor Troy keeps having these dreams where the people on the other side of this spatial anomaly that has trapped them are trying to send her a message as to how they can escape. And they're sending all these coded references to hydrogen, eyes in the dark, one moon circles, And it's just like, just say hydrogen, man. Like, if you can say eyes in the dark, if you can put that much thought into it, if you can put the thought into it to say, let me describe hydrogen in some sort of creative way, why not just say, we need hydrogen, give us hydrogen? Now, these next several comments are from my video about whether or not the Federation is vegan. This first one is from Andrew, who says, Riker does say we no longer enslave animals for food purposes, which could mean vegan or could mean free-range hunted food. That's true. That would be rather slippery of Commander Riker, wouldn't it? Oh, yes, we still eat meat. We just don't enslave the animals we consume. I don't know why I did like a half-assed Hannibal Lecter there, but I did. So you're going to have to live with it. I apologize. But yeah, that could be... Riker could technically be saying, oh, no, we'll eat the fuck out of some steak. It just can't be from a farm. It has to be, free range. And It's funny to think of, like, in the 24th century on Earth, cattle have become wild animals again. And Riker's like, no, you can have like real beef. It doesn't have to be replicated, but you're gonna have to kill your own. They're out there. They live over there in that wilderness. You just have to go find them and kill them yourself, which probably wouldn't be that big of a deal because you got a phaser, right? There's probably a setting on a phaser that'll just skin it for you at the same time that it kills it. And you're just like, oh, look, there's the meat laying on the ground. Awesome. That would have been fun to have on the Oregon Trail, I think. The game, not the actual Oregon Trail. Although it would have been fun to have there, too. I've really gone off the path with this answer, haven't I? Manatee Gag says, Steve, are you forgetting Trip's love of catfish? They mentioned it so much, it was like one of his only personality traits. Am I forgetting Trip's love of catfish? Yes, I completely forgot about that. Here's one from Bep Corrati. Now I want a show about O'Brien's mother's illegal livestock operation. She'd probably be the antagonist there. You know what? If they had ever done the Deep Space Nine version of TNG's episode Family, where the Enterprise is back at Space Dock on Earth and everybody kind of has a week to just relax and go home. If they had done that for Deep Space Nine, maybe during a lull in the Dominion War where everybody gets some time off before heading back to the front, and the humans had come back to Earth, that would have been a great story for O'Brien's part of that episode. O'Brien's story in that episode could have been him coming back to Earth, visiting his mom and getting caught up in some shenanigans regarding her illegal livestock operation. That would have been splendid. That sounds like so much fun that now I wish they had made that episode. Kaylee Hartle, the treatment of the tardigrade was one of the main reasons I rage quit Discovery the first time. Well, and to each their own. If that was not something you enjoyed, then that's not something you enjoyed. That didn't bother me because it was the start of a story arc. Like, it was clear that the characters were bothered by it, but they went along with it because they felt like, well, it's necessary for the war effort. But eventually, even in that context, it became too much for them. It was too much of a compromise. And they decided, we can't do this. This is wrong. So if they had started already knowing exactly what the right thing to do was, there's no room for the story. So I don't mind, because I feel like that really limits story potential when people say, like, well, they're Starfleet, they're 23rd century humans, they've evolved beyond this, they wouldn't do that. Well, then you're limiting the story potential. Like, you have to give the characters the freedom to start out doing or believing the wrong thing so that they can find their way to the right thing. And I'm not saying you have to do that all the time, but for certain stories, you have to just sort of give yourself as the writer permission and give the characters permission to start out on the wrong side and get to the right side eventually, even if they're 23rd century humans and they've evolved past blah, 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 blah. That kind of goes back to it's okay to ignore established things for the sake of a story. And I'm not even saying the tardigrade storyline in the first season of Discovery was like amazingly good. But I get what they were doing, and I appreciate what they were doing. And I do not have a problem with the human characters at least being okay enough with it at the beginning to do it in order to get to the point by the end of that story, which was only like, 2 episodes, where they realize we can't do this. This is actually too much of a moral compromise. We have to set this creature go. I have no problem with that at all, or with stories like that at all. Now, these next few comments are from a video I made where I took an old Star Trek TNG trivia quiz. This one is from Obsidian, who says, TNG taught me that emitting energy/particles from the deflector dish can solve almost any problem. This has yet to pan out in my life. Boy, I hear you. I got one of those deflector dishes as a birthday present 3 or 4 years ago, and honestly, I haven't even taken it out of the box. What am I going to use that thing? Bailey260012, that Kevin Uxbridge impression is amazing. Well, thank you very much. Of course, it is not just a Kevin Uxbridge impression. It is also a Grandpa Harry impression from MacGyver, because it's the same actor. And that's actually how I started doing it, because he recurs on MacGyver as MacGyver's granddad. So I started doing it because I would make fun of him. I would say, oh, because he always called MacGyver Bud. He didn't call him by his name. He didn't call him Mac. He called him Bud. Hey, Bud, it's me, your Grandpa Harry. I'm coming to town. We're going to go to a hockey game. So that's how I started it. And then, it's the same actor, John Anderson, who plays Kevin on that episode of TNG. So, oh, the beautiful Rashawn. She was killed by the Hushnok. So I wiped them all out. I feel a little bad about it, but I'll get over it. And that is the only specific request that I think I have ever made to Jason on the Ensign's log. He always asks me for my input. Jason is an amazing collaborator. It's the Ensign's log is his show. He created it. He runs it. He determines the creative direction, but he is very collaborative. He's very open to my and Dana's suggestions. I almost never make specific requests for episodes. I almost never say, hey, I really want to do this. I'm game to try and do my best with whatever Jason wants to do. But when we got to that point in TNG where our episode was going to correspond with Kevin's episode of TNG, I did say to Jason, I really want to do my John Anderson impression on the show. And I got to do it, and it was a lot of fun. So thanks, Jason. Now, these next few are from my video about why Keiko O'Brien is actually not so bad. This first one is from Cody Roberge, hope I'm pronouncing that right, who says, Keiko O'Brien is Botany Bay. I really don't have anything to add. What could I possibly add? I'm only sharing it in the video because it's such an amazing fucking comment. It's maybe my favorite comment I've ever gotten on a Star Trek video. It's just, it's so good. It's so good. There's like layers to that. That's puns within puns. Oh, nicely done, Cody. I congratulate you and I celebrate you. Jessie Gender, my fave Keiko moment comes when she calls out Miles' racism toward Cardassians in Season 1. That was a really ugly thing you just said. Yes! And a lot of other people pointed that out in the comments as well, and I felt kind of bad for leaving that out because honestly, when I was writing the episode, that moment just slipped my mind. I probably would have mentioned it. I almost definitely would have mentioned it if I had remembered it. And for whatever reason, in my research, I didn't see it, and I had forgotten about it when I was writing the video. But I definitely should have mentioned, because that is not just a great Keiko moment, but a great Miles moment. Because the truth is, Miles is racist toward Cardassians, and it's good to see the show acknowledge that, and to have another character, his wife in this case, call him out on that. It reminded me of an episode of NYPD Blue. Of course, NYPD Blue, one of the lead characters is Detective Sipowicz, who is racist. Only he's racist against real people, not imaginary alien people. But it's, the same basic concept. And he makes a racist gesture while he's having a conversation with his wife. And this is at the point in the series where he and his wife have just had a baby. And he makes a racist gesture, indicating a black person. And his wife, Sylvia, says, don't show that to the baby. They have like a little argument about it where he tries to justify it and say, well, we do this so we don't have to say the word. And, he's trying to make it sound like not as bad as it is. And she's not having any of it. And she ends the conversation by saying, don't show that to the baby. And the O'Brien conversation in Deep Space Nine really reminds me of that. It's a really, really powerful moment. And I definitely should have mentioned it in my video. Here's one from Hugh Milner. While sending her off to Bajor for a botany expedition is certainly a convenient way to write her off the show for a time, I think it's also worth noting the insight the writers give to Bashir about Keiko's situation in the episode she leaves. When Miles talks about ideas to make her happy, Bashir rightly points out that despite being nice gestures, they don't resolve the key problem, that Keiko is a botanist whose career has been effectively ended by the move to DS9. In a way, it sounds like the writers admitting that they've stripped one of their secondary characters of many of the narrative possibilities she had. Yes, that is a good point. I do think Bashir shows some insight in that scene. What's interesting is it doesn't start out that way. When Bashir begins that scene, he makes some jokes about how like, oh, I think that'll buy you about 2 weeks. He starts out, it sounds like he's making like, oh, classic scumbag Julian, the old ball and chain. Well, you bring her flowers and she'll not be mad at you for this long. So if you're giving her an entire arboretum, well, that'll probably buy you about 2 weeks, and then you'll be right back in the doghouse. Women, am I right? Like that, it sounds like that's where he's going, and you're just like, oh, Julian, Jesus Christ. But it turns out he actually has a point to make, which is that the reason she would be that way, it's nothing on her, it's O'Brien, because he's trying to put a Band-Aid on it instead of fixing the actual problem. So yes, Julian does have some insight in that, and I think it's a very well-written scene. My favorite thing about that episode is O'Brien, they end up resolving that and writing Keiko off the show for a while by having O'Brien tell her about this botany expedition on Bajor that she can go on and be a botanist for 6 months. And she's like really excited about it. She's like, oh, that sounds terrific. Oh, but what about Molly? You work here on the station. You're the chief of operations. You can't look after Molly if I'm gone. And Miles O'Brien looks right in his wife's face and says with a smile as though this is good news, oh, don't worry, honey. I already asked. You can take Molly with you. He doesn't say, oh, we'll find a sitter or there's daycare or no. He doesn't say anything like that. He says, oh, when you go traipsing through the jungles of Bajor on a 6-month scientific expedition, don't worry, honey. You can take our little kid with you. Isn't that great? I love that. The fucking balls on this guy. What a piece of shit, right? Here's one from Tay Zonday. I thought the assignment enabled some of Rosalind Chow's best acting, but you'd probably argue why not write Keiko as a dimensional character to unleash that. The Pa Wraith imprisoned her body but unleashed her humanity. I wanted a subplot where the Pa Wraith wasn't actually killed and came back periodically like herpes. It would have been worth it if Bashir had used that analogy. Like if Sisko had said, "Is this the same Pa Wraith that infected Keiko last year? I thought that was gone." "Well, sir, it appears that it will be a recurring thing, sort of like herpes on old 20th century Earth." You know, like something like that. Do you like my Bashir impression? I feel like it's just absolutely top-notch. But yeah, that would have been funny. And yes, that episode, The Assignment, is a good episode. Not such a great showcase for Keiko the character, but an excellent showcase for Rosalind Chow as an actor. She really does fantastic work in that episode, and it's a really, really good show. So, yeah. Bipolar mind droppings. I would have immediately offered to give Wynn an hour each week to teach the students about Bajoran religion. Then I would ask Quark to do an hour a week on Ferengi religion, Dax to do Trill religion, found a human to cover our religions, and then watched Wynn try to argue against it, exposing her for the fraud she is. I see where you're going with this. And then one day you tell Wynn, "Oh, hey, they're remodeling the classroom, so we're going to meet in Cargo Bay 4. And then Wynn shows up in Cargo Bay 4. The door closes behind her. It's sealed. The exterior door raises up. The force field is deactivated, and Wynn is blown into space and killed. And nobody knows what happened. It was an accident. The kind of accident that the teacher, whose husband is the chief of operations on the station, could have had something to do with, but nobody can prove that, and I guess we'll never know." Really, really good idea you had there, Bipolar Mind Droppings. Here's one from Amanda Smith. "I think the hatred for Keiko mainly comes down to two things. One, good old-fashioned misogyny, and two, her episodes largely being about the inherent difficulties that come with a long-term committed relationship." I agree with you on both counts. I think a whole bunch of the anti-Keiko sentiment, especially the really, really bitter, rabid, hateful anti-Keiko sentiment, is just flat-out misogyny. I agree with you. And yeah, it's also the fact that Star Trek heroes, for the most part, have not been married people. Star Trek heroes have been single. Having families, having spouses and children has not been a part of Star Trek. There are very few exceptions to that, and really the two most important exceptions are both on Deep Space Nine: Sisko and the O'Briens. Because Ben Sisko is a father from the very beginning. We always have him and Jake, and then eventually he gets married again to Cassidy. So he is a husband and a father. And of course, Miles is married with Molly when they join the show. And eventually they have a second child as well. So, outside of Deep Space Nine, there really aren't a lot of married couples or people in serious long-term relationships in Star Trek shows. So it's not just that Keiko's stories tend to focus on that. It's also that is just an unusual thing for the franchise. And we know how some Star Trek fans respond to stories or characters that don't fit within their very, very narrowly defined parameters of what belongs in Star Trek. These next few are from my video about Star Trek's Comet episodes. This one is from Anonymous Science. "Thanks for committing to the gag. You are a real rock star. Not one of your Meteor videos, but still a winner. Can't wait for your next comic book video." Okay, so this isn't quite as good as the Keiko is Botany Bay comment from earlier, because that one has brevity on its side. There's a purity and kind of a distilled quality to it that lifts it up. But, I mean, commenting to the gag, a real rock star, not one of your Meteor videos. When you show up with material like that, why you want to be anonymous? Joe! New Discovery episode with a comet synopsis. Crew of USS Discovery cope with their heartbreaking findings of a comet that expresses emotions to tell a story about the countless worlds it witnessed, just to discover that it accidentally destroyed them. I get you, but there's just one problem. That would not be the synopsis for an episode of Discovery. That would be the synopsis for a season of Discovery. And hey, I love Discovery, okay? But you know I'm right. You fucking know I'm right. Here's one from In a Jar. Man, Steve's giving so much credit to Comet here, but what about the contributions of Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Cupid, Dinner, and Blitzen? Okay, this isn't fair. I'm sorry to do this. I'm ignoring the actual joke that was intended in the comment about the reindeer, which is very funny. Kudos to you on that. And I know it's a typo, but I had to get this in because I am just endlessly amused by the idea that one of Santa's reindeer is named Dinner. I mean, they can't all make the sled team, you know? And this last group of comments is from my recent video on Star Trek's Most Honorable Klingon. This one is from Craig Hamilton. No mention of Worf's brother Kurn? Seems to me that every action, every decision, every piece of advice he ever gave was from a place of honor foremost. From deferring to Worf as the older brother, even when he knew Worf's decisions might not be the best, all the way to his asking Worf to kill him to restore his honor after being dishonored with his expulsion from the Council due to Worf's decisions. Kurn oozed Klingon honor more than any other Klingon I can recall. All good points, and one more. That Kurn was played by the inimitable Tony Todd. So those factors all combined make me feel kind of bad for leaving Kurn out. So thank you for leaving that comment and giving me the opportunity to belatedly include Kurn in this video, because you're right. Kurn was a very honorable Klingon and a really, really nice, nicely drawn character, for sure. Taz D. Amor. I've always been intrigued by the Star Trek VI character Brigadier Kurla, military advisor to Chancellor Gorkon. He had some great dialogue in that show and always struck me as quite the honorable warrior, being very passionate and protective of the Chancellor, but not so blinded by the Klingon kill-all-enemies ethos that he was able to recognize that Dr. McCoy and Captain Kirk beamed aboard Kronos 1 to try and help the situation. I wish we could have seen more of that character. Kurla could have been an outstanding recurring presence in Star Trek Excelsior had the powers that be had the sense to greenlight that show. One of the things that's interesting, not just about Kurla, but about all the Klingons in Star Trek VI, is that they really don't behave like the Klingons in the earlier movies, or the Klingons in TNG even. They're not nearly as battle-obsessed. They're not nearly as rough and as sort of, cavemanish. They're very sort of intellectual and erudite. And they still talk of honor and battle and things like that, but they're much more sort of, they're especially in the case of General Chang, they're very Shakespearean. They're very sort of, they're like somewhere in the middle between the more guttural, gruff, rough and tumble Klingons of TNG and the very sort of calculating, very human-seeming Klingons of the original series. And I like that. I really like those Klingons from Star Trek VI. And it would have been nice to see them, maybe not even those specific characters, but just Klingons like that more often. I think it's and again, it's an example of do what is right for your story. If someone had come to Nicholas Meyer and said, Klingons don't really act the way you have them acting, if somebody said that to him, he ignored them. And he was right to do that, because he did what was best for his story. Here's one from Stardust 13. How could you not mention Kalar? She called out Duras and lost her life over it. She didn't give a crap about Worf's discommendation, trying to take the marital oath with him anyway because she wants her son to know his father. By the way, we almost named our cat after her, because she has a long ridge of fur down her back that looks like Klingon ridges. I was outvoted. She is named Cassette. I love Les Mis and that name, so it's all good. People have pointed out other Klingons that I could have mentioned in the video that I didn't. That earlier comment mentioned Kurn, which I thought was a good one. Leaving out Kalar is the only one that I feel bad about. I remembered Kalar as I was writing the video and I was almost done the script and it was almost time to shoot. And the video, and it was long enough anyway, and I didn't want to make a video that was going to be even longer than what I had already written, so I decided to leave her out. But I do feel bad, because Kalar is a really, really interesting character. She only appears in, I think, 2 episodes, but she comes across very strongly. She's a very well-drawn character, and you're right, she is honorable. She's honorable to the point that she doesn't care about the expectations of her society. She cares about what she thinks is right, and she makes that demand of Worf. She says, look, let's do what we think is right. Who cares what Klingon society thinks of us? Let's do what we think is right. Whether it's their relationship or with Alexander, right? So, that is a very admirable quality. And as you say, she pays the ultimate price. She is unfortunately one of the many female characters who is killed off to motivate the male character. She is fridged, which is not the best character fate. But yeah, so Kalar is a great character. And of course, Susie Plaxon, who plays her, is fantastic. She's played other roles in the franchise throughout the various Star Trek shows. She's amazing. And yeah, I feel bad for leaving out Kalar. Kalar should have warranted at least a mention in my video, and I left her out. So my apologies for that. Here's one from Hannah Large. Grilka, the Duras sisters, Sorella, Mara. Can't help noticing a theme as to the notable characters in your list. And that is completely fair to point out. That is true. It was a very male-dominated list. I think B'Elanna was the only woman in the list of the Klingons I mentioned. And again, that is an oversight on my part, and it's completely fair to point that out. Although I will say, Sorella and Mara, I think Sorella was only in one episode. I think Mara was also only in one episode, and neither one of those characters really left that much of an impression on me. Sorella probably more so than Mara, because she was like the difficult, sort of future mother-in-law, or she was in that role anyway, in the wedding episode with Worf and Dax on Deep Space Nine. But Grilka, and Grilka, yes, Grilka was, again, another excellent character, appeared in a couple episodes. So I could see an argument being made for her inclusion. But the Duras sisters in a video about honorable Klingons? Like, I completely get you. Like, your argument that I included way more male characters and female characters is totally valid. I completely plead guilty to that and apologize for that. But the Duras sisters don't belong anywhere near a video about most honorable Klingons. Like, good characters, fun characters. They were really fun characters. I think the Duras sisters were terrific. But honorable, they most definitely were not. By Klingon or by human standards. They were many, many things, but they definitely were not honorable. And that's actually one of the things that made them so great, is that they were so blatantly dishonorable in everything they did. So I don't feel bad about leaving them out. No, not a little bit. They don't really fit in with the concept of that video. And finally, last comment on the Klingon video, last comment I'm going to respond to here. It's from Milady70. Shocked that Worf's abandonment of Alexander didn't knock him out of the running for most honorable, or even get a mention. If Worf had enough self-awareness that he could know, or at least strongly suspect, that he was not going to be a very good dad, then it was better and more honorable for him to send Alexander to Earth to live with his parents, or, Worf's parents, Alexander's grandparents, because they could provide a better upbringing for him than Worf could. So that's honorable, right? And also, he got a child off of the Enterprise, which is also inherently an honorable thing to do. Because the Enterprise is an incredibly dangerous place for anyone to be, let alone a whole bunch of kids. So Worf said, you're not going to live here. You're going to live on Earth with your grandparents. So it's actually, viewed from those perspectives, a very honorable thing for Worf to have done. And viewed from my perspective of, seriously, would you want to have Alexander living with you? Also, very honorable thing to do. I mean, just look at Alexander did live with Worf on the ship for a few months, and within a few episodes of him moving in, Lwaxana Troy's hanging around. The kid's nothing but trouble. Anyway, that's it for the comments. Thank you all so much for leaving such great comments. Of course, there are always more comments left on all the videos than I possibly have time to respond in this format, but to everybody who leaves comments on my stuff, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Those of you who are supporters via Patreon or a YouTube membership, or who have left, sent me one-time gifts through PayPal or Venmo or the super thanks button. Like, there are all kinds of ways to support this channel. There are links to all of them in the description, and I would encourage you all to do that if my work means anything to you, because I couldn't do this without the support from my viewers and my patrons and members and everything. But thanks to all of you, whether you give me money or not. I really appreciate it when you give me money. But even those of you who don't, if you just watch these things and leave comments, I appreciate that so much. It really means a lot. And thanks to everybody, especially whose comments I chose, for giving me an excuse to make this video. And hopefully it was entertaining for you. And yeah, I will be back to do some more Star Trek stuff in a couple of weeks. Later this month, I have a video. It's my next Regulation Trek Actually video that was picked by the last completed poll about where Star Trek comes from. That's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll enjoy that one. Hopefully you'll come back for the other videos that I'll be doing between now and then. And yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to become a patron or become a member if you want to help me out financially. Or just give a one-time gift through PayPal or Venmo or the Super Thanks button here on the YouTube page. All that stuff is linked and explained, etc. in the video description. And yeah, have a good day, have a good week, whatever time it is, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.